Today, we're diving into an incredible story about transformation, one that goes from the grind of engineering to financial independence in Hawaii.
Our guest, Patrick Grimes, didn't just wake up one day and become an investor. He went through the ups and downs, including the 2008 financial crisis, and learned some hard lessons along the way.
One of the biggest takeaways from this conversation is the importance of saving before investing and how persistence and tenacity play a crucial role in long-term success.
And it's not just about the numbers. Patrick shares how his travel broadened his perspective, shaping the way he thinks about wealth, freedom, and the true meaning of enough. This episode is packed with wisdom on financial independence, smart investing, and designing a life that aligns with what truly matters.
With that being said, let's get into today's episode with Patrick Grimes.
Well, like most of your listeners, I was a high-paid professional working extremely hard. I was a mechanical engineer, have a master's in engineering and an MBA, and I worked my way. I didn't have anything handed to me. Was doing well early on, and I took some advice from some founders of the company I work for to not invest in more company stock, don't invest in startups. And they told me that they had bought everything in real estate. They made all their money in high tech, and then they spent it all in real estate. And they thought alternative investments are what going to get you there. So that's what started it. Albeit I was a kind of a snot-nosed engineer, but ready to rule the world and double, triple my money. And I lost everything in 2009 and 10 because I was really highly leveraged and really speculative pre-development, and it took me down. So I was humbled quickly. Learned the hard way, and that's what started it all.
Nice. I certainly want to get back to that, but let's go back to the initial. What did you remember, Patrick, your parents teaching you about money growing up?
Not much. My grandparents did. They had fruit trees, and I remember picking fruits and going door to door and selling them. I had my little entrepreneurial endeavors. When I was in high school, I took some side jobs. I learned a bit about computers. I was making websites for the school district in high school. And then I got a job at the Sierra Internet. I was raised on the south side of Yosemite up in the mountains, and the monopolizing ISP back when there were local ISPs up there got me a job. And so that kind of launched me into high tech. And then engineering just became, a natural fit for me at that point.
Okay. So your parents didn't really teach you much about investing. So no one in your history had ever done anything, any sort of alternative investments. Were they even investors? Did they do the stock market? Anything like that from you can remember?
So on both sides of my family, there was on the grandparents and great grandparents side. So on my dad's side, my grandpa Kaiser had some oil royalties. And not sizable, they're not huge, but they stepped down through the generations, not held by my mother. But that was really cool to see. And throughout my whole life, we heard stories about, the constant generational cash flow just coming in very modest. But also on my mom's side, it was the same grandpa that had this entrepreneurial spirit. And he did some investments here and there. He did some real estate rentals, and he had worked on some little entrepreneurial. Obviously, he died when I was pretty young. He died, before I graduated college. He died when I was in very beginning of college. So I didn't get too much exposure to that. But my father had 3 doctorate degrees. He was an educator.
Wow.
Doctorate in divinity, and a doctorate in education, and a doctorate in evolution. So widespread education. I was really raised as an educator. And my sister, she's got her PhD in clinical psychology. And she reminds me frequently that my 2 master's degrees don't meet 1 PhD. So, and so
she is true. She is right. She did have to do the dissertation.
Yeah. Yeah. So and so I'm not like the top dog in my family by any means, but in investing, I'm the only in my immediate, and as I know, my extended family participating in this alt space.
And the reason I ask so much with our guests about their childhood is we seem to perpetuate whatever is normal to us. So for most people, when you talk about investing at all, most people are like, that's not for me, that's for other people. just for you to grow up with stories about your grandfather and your great grandfather being entrepreneurs, investing in oil and gas, investing whatever, that at least showed you that that's something possible that's open to you, Patrick, where most of our audience believes for some reason that it's not, just because it's not a part of their history. But I would also say that most of us don't even know our history because we never dare to ask about our great grandparents, and how many of our parents even know about our great great grandparents to even tell us if that was possible. So you eventually became an engineer. You're now working in, I'm guessing, a kind of a tech focused area.
Yeah, so mechanical engineer. I did machine design, automation, and robotics. I had an affinity for taking apart VCRs as well as a kid and building little electrical circuits. And so in college, I started doing some robotics. I actually got first place in the senior design competition for the automated steak barbecuing apparatus, the grill omation. And that kind of led me into this robotics and automation. I started at a machine design firm right out of college, mostly doing automated assembly, custom machine builds, tooling for medical device, some aerospace stuff. And that was just so cool because had the chance to work with some of the smartest people in the world that, and throughout my career, I mean, we're talking defense, rockets at Tesla, SpaceX, Abbott, J&J, all these cool new technologies and R&D facilities, that little gizmos and gadgets. Like I was doing solar cells for Lockheed, like automated robotic, all kinds of and then during COVID, I helped out with COVID assembly test systems and converting flu tests to COVID tests and all this cool stuff. But I loved it for many years. But I always had that voice in my head that to really get the security and the life I wanted for my family, I needed to put my money somewhere else. I needed to make it somewhere, and I needed to invest it, buy assets somewhere else.
Before that, as that voice was kind of talking to you and telling you, hey, you need to do something, what were you doing with your money at that time?
Actually, right out of college, I started the journey of saving. I've always actually been a little bit of a saver. My nickname in the family was Pack Rat for other reasons too. I would just collect things, not trash, but like, little treasures. And I was always the hobbyist. I've always got 100 hobbies going on. But I've always been kind of saver. And so when I started with my first full-time gig out of college, and I did some cool internships before then. I did some work with the largest winery in the world. And I did some work with Toyota, which is now the Tesla facility in Fremont. So I did some really cool stuff before. But when I landed my first job, I remember going to HR and asking her out of my very first paychecks, hey, I created it was probably 6 months in, I think, and I just finished a trip around around Europe and Asia for a year, or Europe. At that time it was Europe. I did a gap year in Europe. So I had a little bit of catch up to do, but right around that first paychecks, I started getting my reserves built back up. And then I created a separate bank account, not with my Wells Fargo at the time, but it was Umpqua Bank, some weird mountain bank. And I was like, let's just start stashing. So I took a chunk. I think the first one was $400 out of every paycheck. And I said, okay, that's what I'm going to put it somewhere else and it'll disappear. And then when I got a raise, I increased it. And when I got a raise, I increased. When I got a bonus, I just put it there. And so I was actually not allowing myself to increase my lifestyle. I was doing really fun things. There was one summer where I went camping 18 times in one summer. I've whitewater rafted the Grand Canyon. I've hiked the base camp of Everest. I've been up Mount Fuji, Mount Shasta. I've done 3 14ers in Colorado. I've been up 3 sacred mountains in China and Mount Sinai in Egypt. I mean, I've done a lot of cool stuff, but it didn't take a lot of money to do that if your lifestyle's right. But I stashed it. I stashed it all. And so then I started making investments. It's interesting to say that I lost everything because my initial investments were speculative in pre-development. So, that was, again, that was the lessons that you hope to learn early in life.
And you certainly did. I find that very interesting. I think most people, when they click on the video, they see the podcast, it's probably going to be titled something about alternative investments, and people are going to be, I want to learn about that. But I think right there, what you did with your income, the secret was saving a little bit, not allowing your lifestyle to increase. So you at least had the capital to go and unfortunately lose it. But that gave you the ability to start to learn from there. Where most people, they look at, what's the investment? Tell me the investment. I need that to work out. Then I'll start to save money. When you have to flip those two equations. You have to start to save money before you can even start to talk about what am I going to invest it in. How did you learn that? Who taught you that? I know you said you're already a saver, but that lifestyle inflation I find to be the most pernicious thing when it comes to most young people in their financial journeys.
Well, the purple book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad played a pretty big role in that. And I started attending some, real estate groups, after I got the advice I got, started downloading some books and reading some books, started looking around on the internet, and I kind of got the bug of, like, if I ever went out of this, I love engineering, don't get me wrong, but I don't want that to be, I had lived in scarcity most of my life, right? And I didn't necessarily want that to be my future. And I didn't want that for my family and my family's future and soon to be family. And it turned out it was another 10 years or so. I waited till I was 35 to marry a 27-year-old. So it took me a little bit longer to actually get there. But I knew that I wanted to do some fun things and some cool things. And so that's what I chose to do.
So let's go ahead and talk about the 2008. You're going to start to invest in the alt space. Now, I know you've saved some money up, and now some of your people that you work with are sitting there telling you, Patrick, what you need to do if you want to be successful is you need to go into real estate. Was that the only thing you were going into? Did you have anything stocked away in a company 401k, IRAs, anything like that? Or was it like, I'm going in hard. Let's start going into speculative assets?
I've always maxed out my 401k, and I've always maxed out the employer contribution while I was an employee until I became a contractor later in life. But I always had that. And like I said, I was never financially devastated per se. I was still a gainfully employed engineer, right? When you go for the foreclosure, not only is it I was paying into a black hole for almost a year until I finally found an attorney that said, just stop, right? Because you couldn't get a hold of the lender. They had bought and sold my notes so many times. And as long as you're performing, they don't care about you. And when I talked to them, man, they just raked me over the coals. And I was actually paying debt forgiveness because they not only foreclosed, but they wrote off it as debt forgiveness, quote unquote, which means the IRS then turned around and 1099 me as the debt for forgiven debt as income. And I didn't know that any of that was going to happen. And so I didn't go through bankruptcy. And actually, that was the prevailing path of most people in my shoes. They went through bankruptcy. And I don't necessarily judge anybody that did that. I mean, it was a viable way, and potentially I would have been better off. But I took a little bit longer to not do that, and took a little bit longer to recover because I didn't do that. So on the other side of it, I'm still an entrepreneur that hasn't ever filed for bankruptcy, right? So that's kind of neat.
Nice. Well, tell me a little bit about that recovery. I mean, I have to imagine that it's stressful. It's hard to go through that. But before we get to the recovery, actually, I do want our listeners to notice that, Patrick, you said that, I lost it all in the real estate. I lost it all in 2008. But in truth, you really didn't. Yeah, you might have lost some of the 401k and everything, but you only lose when you sell. So even with you investing quite a bit into your alternative assets, you were still well diversified into other asset groups. When I hear people say, oh, I go all into this, everyone just thinks that, yes, 100% of it was there. But to your point, you had other places that your money was parked. So that's just an important caveat that everyone needs to add in. Now, how did you dig yourself out of this hole? You finally meet this attorney. They say you have to let this stuff go. Stop holding on. The ride just keeps on going to go down, down, down. What was that like to build yourself back up, to dig out of this hole?
Well, so alternative investing and portfolio diversification that you're touching on in non-correlated, what we call investments, ones that don't have the same fundamental markets, is all about what I'm about now. And we can certainly go into that, but you're touching on exactly what, those lessons that you learn when you go through. The other aspect of what you're saying is asset protection and asset protection strategies. And you can't touch your 401ks, right? And so there are ways that you can build wealth, and even as a failure here in America, not so much in China, which has been a growing experience for my wife and I because she's Chinese. But it's ways that you can protect your wealth through asset protection. I mean, you go to Forbes, I've got like a dozen articles now or something, and I talk all about single family investing and the asset protection, the tax advantages, retirement accounts, and so all those things that kind of fall along the lines of like, how can you fail and it be fine and you get through it, right? I was really, it was an ego battered bruise, and I was kind of mad, at myself. And, it was, and I was kind of frustrated by the due diligence I did, because I thought it all panned out and these guys had a great track record and I just failed hard. And, but at the same time, I just paid and I made my way out of it. And I got that debt forgiven, and then I had paid the taxes on that. And then after that, I had to rebuild the nest egg. So I just dove right back into my career, and I said, look, we're going to do this again. Did it once already, started again, saving up. I joined a master program. So I was working full time. I was traveling for work. I was doing night classes and weekend classes and I got 2 degrees. I got an MBA and a master's in engineering. And after that, I decided, look, I'm going to go trade up. I'm going to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond. So I got a job at a different automation firm, Southern California, made a leap. But in between the two, I traveled the Middle East and Asia for a year. And so
Cool.
that was awesome. It was a much needed break, because I was pretty darn stressed. But I flew to Cairo during Ramadan, and I experienced some of the really cool traditions of Islam. And like I said, I went through Sinai, traveled down the Nile to Sudan, went to the temples along the way. I went to Israel, Jerusalem. I went to the Kinneret, went to the Dome of the Rock, went to Amman, Jordan, and then all through. I went through China, did Buddhist temple stays in China, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Laos, Malaysia, Singapore. Then I did the base camp of Everest before I came home, Kathmandu. So, that kind of trip really helped me slow down, recenter, and intentionally move into the next phases of my life. And like any job, you can get really caught up in it, get really excited about it, and years can go by. And you're like, what happened? I think the kind of step back to take 2 steps forward has really worked for me twice in my life, right? Before I started my first real job after college, and after I graduated my dual master program. That led me back to a point where I said, look, I'm going to get back into this wealth building strategy. I'm going to come home, and I'm going to take this new, job that's kind of scary, because I'm like an executive kind of position now. And I'm going to really knock it out of the park, and I'm going to start my next run. And that's what I did. I started in parallel with kicking ass and taking names and doing automated robotic systems for Tesla and for Abbott and J&J and Boeing and Raytheon and Lockheed and all these cool things. It was really, really fun. We did some of the autonomous cars with Waymo, like back when they were the weird egg-shaped stuff. It was super cool, and now they're actually driving around. It's neat.
Yeah.
But I was on the side of my night job. I was downloading books. I was reading. I was running in the mornings, every morning, the podcasts and TED Talks. And I was learning all about investment strategies. And that's when I circled back to more sustainable wealth building strategies, not speculating, but investing, capital preservation, being the tortoise, not the hare, and recession resilient markets. You can buy for cash flow. And so I pivoted to Texas, pivoted to Houston, right? I was, and it was working. So I started building a portfolio that time.
Wonderful. And I certainly want to get into passive investing mastery just here in a second. But before we do, I just want to make sure that our audience recognizes that when you kind of fell down, you were in debt, you had all these things, there were no secrets. It was hard work. It was dedication. It was long hours, long days for what I have to imagine was a number of years. And where most people, when they fall down, they decide, I'm just not going to get up. Or before I get up, somebody needs to come and save me. Someone needs to tell me the secret. And from what I heard from you, Patrick, was there was no secret. It was just a grind, and it sucked. And you pushed through and you persevered. The next thing I want to get to, unless you have anything to kind of touch on there before I talk about the next part.
Well, I gave away 2 books. The first book was the first time I told my story, and I did a chapter in that. The chapter of that first book was, or the title of that first book was Persistence, Pivots, and Game Changers, Turning Challenges and Opportunities. And so that just inherently, it's really that tenacious, that persistence and pivoting, that paid off over the long haul.
Yeah. And I have to imagine that tenacity, that ability to endure means that you had to have a strong why. Your values must have been pretty in line What was the goal? Because I doubt the goal was just to get out of debt. There had to be something bigger for you to persevere through that for so long. Well, what was it that you can remember?
Well, throughout my life, it's changed. I kind of had this vision of what the future might be like with a family, and to have a little bit different upbringing for my children than I did. That was part of the pitch that the original founder told me in my first engineering job. And, if you really want to build that sustained wealth building, and for the life you want for your family, you're going to have to invest it in real estate. I didn't make my money in high tech and invest it in high tech. And so that stuck with me. Over the years, that was a bit of a scarcity mindset, right? And over the years, when I started seeing cash flow cover expenses, I started seeing the ability for this to just not be scarcity. Then it became more like, well, let's create a portfolio that will withstand the test of time, and let's venture not just into stock market and real estate, but maybe energy and legal and medical and all these other, and gold and silver, precious metals, all these other things where they're not driven by the same market factors. And it became about, how do you not just build like independence, but then how do you build a portfolio with foundational investments which will stand the test of time? And those were really following the breadcrumbs of the wealthy, the hedge funds and the sovereign funds, and how they invest. Like 99.9% of the investors in America are the people that don't think they're investors in America, but everybody's an investor in America. They don't really have awareness of any of that. And so that became more about stability. And now our mission really is, part of it is to educate investors to achieve mastery in the art of alternative investing. But the mission is financial security in non-correlated investments, but so that you can contribute to the causes you care about most. Because once you get past security, and then you get past independence, financial independence, then you want to security, which is stability across markets. And then you want to be able to contribute where you're not trading where you live, right? You're not trading what you do with your time. And you can then give back to your family, your friends, your hobbies, or those causes you care about most. So that's kind of that like progressive path, and lessons from thought leaders, which we give away these books free on my website. That I did a chapter in, and that really leans in to that last phase, right? Where you want to get to and where you're striving to. Nobody ever told me about this stuff. It's like a young snot-nosed engineer, gambling my piggy bank. But ultimately, I think that's the path everybody's on, and some people will get to certain levels, and some people won't.
Yeah. As you've talked a little bit about your portfolios, you remind me a lot of Ray Dalio and the things he talks about with his golden butterfly portfolio of the 5 to 10 uncorrelated assets of things that are, so when things are zigging, you have things that are zagging. Another thing, though, that makes me think about you and Ray Dalio is your propensity to go around the world and to travel. One thing that you mentioned, I heard you say, is you did some time in Asia. And during that time, you went to a bunch of Buddhist temples. So I have to imagine that year abroad, to go to the ashrams, to maybe spend time with the monks, to be alone with yourself and to listen to your own inner wisdom. That's something that we here in America never get. I think that all of man's discontent comes from his inability to sit in a room alone with himself. Did you feel that that year alone, maybe studying, maybe meditating, I'm not sure what you did on that year, was that moment of transcendence to come back rejuvenated and to listen to your own kind of inner wisdom on how to move forward, something that most people never really do, because you had to kind of reinvent the wheel there?
Well, when I was raised, it was mostly in the church, and my father was a pastor during some points, but both my grandparents were ministers at various times. In fact, my mom's dad was a full-time minister for 55 years. So I was raised in the church, Protestant, and but at the same time, here's my father, who is also a scientist, who ultimately went and got a doctorate in evolution, who spent his life studying about astronomy and biology, and he actually taught biology for decades. And so I was raised with like kind of learning about the origin of the universe and all this biological, and they were a little bit at odds with some of this conservative like this teachings happening. And so I was kind of raised in the mountains, a little bit isolated on the south side of Yosemite National Park. where all I had was like fuzzy channel 8 and 11. So we didn't, like, we had bunny ears on our TV. We didn't have cable, satellite, I think by design. So I was raised in the mountains, looking through telescopes, going on hikes through the wilderness, and our backyard was just a sled run where we had a steerable racing sled because my mom didn't want us running into the trees anymore. Or we were hiking, right? My dad and I backpacked for 25 days through the John Muir Trail from Yosemite to Whitney together, right? It was extraordinary stuff. So, but you kind of go from that and then you go to the city and you're like in this high-tech, fast-paced environment, kind of you lose yourself. And then after that trip to, Europe, I came back and I was able to find that center again. I was able to go, like one of those summers, I think I mentioned, I went camping 18 times, Whitewater to the Grand Canyon. I did a bunch of things. But then I started a night class and I was master's in engineering and business, and I was traveling constantly, and I was living in the middle of San Francisco at that point. And man, it was amazing, but it was just chaotic and psycho. But that trip across the Middle East and Asia slowed me down. It allowed me to take slower paces. I bought a Quran, I bought the Torah, I bought the Bible, and I was reading these texts, going through these, and I was not just Buddhist temple stays, but I stayed the night in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest place in Christianity. I hiked Mount Sinai with the pilgrims, going to where, the celebrated place Moses chiseled the Ten Commandments, and I went through the mosques. My wife and I also went to India later in life, and we participated a lot of the Hindu stuff. So I did a lot to slow myself down, to recenter. And I thought some things were really unique, like the Baha'i faith. We went to the Baha'i Center in Haifa. That's like so many different religions kind of wrapped into one, and they packaged together. But it did help me. It did help me slow down, not only get an appreciation for some of the other religions out there and how there are such great people in them and how they're framed so oddly here by the media to Americans, and the love and the warmth and the welcome that I felt in the Muslim countries and Islam, and as well as in the Israeli locations. It really was amazing, and then was brought in like by the monks and the Buddhist monks. I just stayed at the temples for weeks, and we would just participate, in the activities. I thought it was just such a fascinating. It did help slow me down. I don't ever talk about this stuff on podcasts, by the way. So you're actually
we're always a little bit different.
Yeah, you're getting me out here, which is cool. It did help slow me down. It did help me recenter, and it did help me really sharpen my pencil on what's important and what I want to do intentionally with the next several years of my life. Ultimately, I married a Chinese girl that was from a Buddhist family, and that never would have happened. I never would have fully understood to come from of her totally devout Buddhist father, which walks around with chanting earplugs when we're just like, we're walking around town and he's got chants going on, and he's just the perfect, slow, meaningful, thoughtful example of a Buddhist father you'd imagine, and constantly is just speaking in sayings, right? But I never would have been able to fully appreciate that perspective that come from, and then just fall in love with this girl. Not only have we traveled similar places in China before, and we happen to both love Sichuan hot pot, which I discovered when I was out there, but it actually resulted in me finding another half, which had another half of me that I had actually left behind on those travels, right? And kind of helped to synergize, I think, overall who the values that I had for my future. And we shared that. Those both the religions as well as the energy and the faiths out there. And so, anyways, talking a lot here, but it's cool to hash this stuff out.
Yeah, the reason I ask these questions is I see that majority of our audience is Americans. And if you're not Americans, you're probably going to be in a first world country if you're listening to a podcast. We get stuck in the hamster wheel. We get stuck at the rat race. We don't ever take the time to breathe and wake up and say, is this what I really want? How many of us do we go to our job, to a boss that we hate, to work 9 to 5 to get a little bit of money so that at the end of the week we can go and party to make up for the terrible job that we had to work? And we just keep this cycle going over and over and over again, never stopping for a second to say, is this really what I want? And the joy of travel. I mean, I'm a big traveler just like yourself, Patrick, and the joy of travel, the joy of going and seeing other cultures, seeing the way that other people live, it gives you that perspective. It forces you to look at a different way of living and say that, hey, these people, maybe they don't have as much as I do in America or whatever country I'm in. Maybe they don't have as many clothes, as big a house, but for some reason they're happy. Like they're really, really happy.
Really happy.
And where I am in my life, I have all the abundance in the world. I mean, for God's sakes, if you're listening to this podcast, you're in the top 1% of civilization through all of history. Yet we only look at the things that we lack rather than the infinite number of things that we have. The one thing we don't have is the only thing that matters, though. And I think by you talking about that perspective of that year abroad, that gave you the ability to come back and do something that most people are unwilling to do. So with that, that kind of leads me into, tell me a little bit about passive investing mastery for our audience, and what can they learn from what it is that you teach?
Really well put, Chris. Yeah, I agree with your line of thinking there, most definitely. Passive investing mastery is a passion project for me, and it really has two parts to it. One part is we educate our investors on a number of different ways. Got a bunch of articles out there. I've been invited to over 100 podcasts now. I'm on stages, virtual and live ones, and I've got books we give away. You can go to my website, passiveinvestingmastery.com/book, and I'll sign it and ship it out. And hopefully it inspires you along your journey, wherever you're at. We just send it out. You can also download the ebook if you're not a book person, but it's just kind of my give back. We really do two things. We have a wealth accelerator series email that goes out every Saturday, and that's been very beneficial. We get a lot of good feedback about that. But ultimately, we put two sides. One is we educate investors to achieve mastery in the art of alternative passive investing. This is not the stock market. That's not, and we do that through all these things. We also have a biweekly series where when I was a high-paid professional, I was learning about all these different alternative investment strategies, and nobody else knew about them. And I'm working with some of the smartest designers and R&D folks at Facebook and Google and Genentech, and just all through the Silicon Valley, defense and medical, and they had no idea. I had no idea any of this stuff. And so ultimately, I was just trading the baseball cards of these alternative investing strategies, which is a couple dudes, right? And so I decided, look, with Passive Investing Mastery, we're not just a real estate company anymore. We're going to create a company that's very broad so that we can educate on much more truly aligns with my portfolio beliefs. And that's non-correlation, as you said, that's getting assets in all these different markets. So we educate in that. We have a bi-weekly mastery series, and this is me showing my hand as well as the rest of the deck, because we've done a ton of them now, where every single 2 weeks, every bi-weekly, we have these completely new alternative investment strategies. Like every single week, every couple of weeks, it's a completely new one. We get 2 to 3 panelists that have been doing this oftentimes for decades, and we go deep dive into whether it's gold mining or crypto or buying an airplane for cash flow or tax liens and tax deeds or mobile home parks, or we go through so much cool stuff, laundry mats, oil and gas. And if we're not doing one, let me know. I will find those people and we'll put one on. But the idea is just to give awareness, and we go deep dive as fast as we can in 45 minutes. We have this great panel, these experts, and we kick it around. We talk about the pros, the cons, the risks, how you access these investments, what to watch out for. And so we really just kind of create awareness of alternative investing strategies, and so desperately needed in America. And so that's kind of my blue ocean approach. It just, give back everything that a lot of us just keep kind of in our email box. Like we get inundated with all these cool new investments and nobody talks about them. Not popular, right? So anyways, we're doing that. We also have deals, right? We also sponsor deals in alignment with our mission. So ones that are non-correlated, ones opportunistic. We have, right now, the coolest one we have is litigation finance. And we're actually accessing the legal industry, which, like medical and education, are fairly steady. They're needed in recessions. People need healthcare in recessions. They need educating, skilling and reskilling in recessions, and they need legal representation. It's kind of like betting with a house. If you look, they always are winning. The attorneys are always winning. In fact, there's even arguments that in downturns, people get more litigious
Yes.
and attorneys are busier. So anyways, the litigation finance is a really, really cool asset because it gives you access to what's a really cool industry that has much less volatility than the stock market, real estate, oil and gas. And we show those graphs and those charts. I'm an engineer, so there's a ton of, in our slide decks. But we're lending to attorneys just like we are in our debt fund. And we have an income fund that we lend to commercial real estate operators. And then we have a litigation finance fund where we lend to legal operators that are in the legal industry. So it gives somebody that ability to put something somewhere else, like draw the pie chart of your wealth and just all these pieces. You realize they're really all one thing or two things. And right now, 11 out of the last 14 Fed rate hikes ended in a market bust. Who feels good about that? You should always be diversified and non-correlate, but especially today, because the world's biggest economy betting against the dollar while inflation is barely under control and now just in trade war. Holy crap. If there's any time to drop some cash somewhere into an investment that can grow at a time when the rest of your portfolio goes for a ride, this is that time.
Agreed. Now, I know for most people, they hear you, they hear you talking about alternative investments, and the first thing they're going to ask is, okay, Patrick, I understand your thesis. It makes sense to me, but how? I feel like it's even hard to get people to invest in general, even just in the general stock market. Now, if someone's done that, the next question is, how do I do alternatives? How do I do all this stuff? And the perfect plan may be amazing, and the perfect plan has alts and all these things, but the perfect plan means nothing if the person behind it is refusing or afraid to execute. So where do they even begin?
We always say just set up a call. Set up a call and we can talk. One of the things that since I walked away from engineering, it's heartbreaking. I walked away from, like my day job, and I was a contractor for a lot of time, just loving it. But now I have a lot of free time. I get to talk to investors, and I don't necessarily have a lot of free time, but that's what I get to choose. That's what I choose to do with my time. So on my website, I have openings on my calendar, and I'm not a financial advisor. You know what I've done. I've just got done telling you everything I've done. I'm not an attorney and I'm not a CPA. So it's like a financial, legal, or tax advice. But we do walk through, publicly available information on how the wealthy invest. And we do have a platform which I think there's like 40 different alternatives focused in there. So we have a lot of directions we can point you in. If we're not a stop along your way, we can get you pointed in the right direction. And generally, if you jump in, start listening to these webinars we do bi-weekly, you jump into some of these deal webinars that we have replays on our site, slide deck, you're going to slowly get more and more comfortable, because what you're going to learn is alternatives are more and more similar. All the same kind of mechanisms are in lending to attorneys as there are in lending to real estate. You bought a house, it turns out, or lived in a house that was bought, you know about how litigation finance works, because it's all the same. It's just an asset-backed lending strategy. What you'll find is it'll become more and more familiar. And so I think you got to do one passive step a day, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is. I run every morning and I put on TED Talks, audio books, educational webinars on investing strategies. I listen to something, I engage in something once a day, passively going about my life. I feed my brain and condition my brain to continue to re-engage into mostly leadership, alternative investing, and now just in how to raise a toddler. So we have a 2-year-old. And so one passive step a day, and then aim for one active step a week, if not one every 2 weeks, which is we are inherently tribal, nomadic type people. We don't want to venture out into the desert alone. Nobody wants to do that. We're not wired to be that way, so don't try. And I did once, and I lost my ass, right? I didn't have the right people actively working with me that had been down these roads. I didn't have the right mentors I was engaging with that could look over my shoulder along the way. But so you need to really build your tribe. We help build one, but there's lots of them out there. You can Google search meetup groups for real estate. And when I started going to meetup groups for real estate, man, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, from the mountains to San Francisco to LA, I'm still friends with those people. Decades later, you build good friendships. You start being around these people that have already made it to certain levels and seeing how they think and how they engage with the world, you'll start to build your tribe. And then ultimately, you have these kind of people that really love you, close to you, scared about you venturing away from them. But you'll have the confidence because you know you're joining another group, right? And so I think that helps, those two things. And if you just start chipping away at those, set up a call with sponsors like myself, get into educational platforms. That's how I did it, right? And I've now spoken to thousands of other investors myself personally, and that's how they're doing it, right? So it just takes those steps to make it happen.
Yeah. Here on the podcast, we talk a lot about the aggregation of marginal gains, where I always say 1% better. I'm not asking you to go from wherever you are, listener, to sitting on your couch or in your car to being Patrick tomorrow. I'm asking for 1%. Patrick didn't go from where he was in 2008 to where he is today in one day. It took however many years, 17 years of hard work every day, 1% better, 1% better. If you compound that every 72 days, you're 100% better. So just keep on working at it just a little bit. But nothing ever changes and nothing ever changes. If you're just sitting there hoping that Patrick's going to float on down from the sky and teach you everything without you ever seeking out the knowledge, you're going to be sitting and waiting for a long time, because while Patrick may want to help the world, he's not searching out every single person and forcing them to come along. He's looking for the people that want to come willingly. So, Patrick, we've talked a lot about your portfolio, and part of when I am a financial advisor by trade, and I do manage some people's accounts. It's not a huge amount. I prefer doing the financial coaching, but something I like to do is called the SWAN system. And SWAN for my retirees stands for sleep well at night. Because I always say the perfect plan means nothing if you can't stick to it. And if you can't sleep because you are so worried about what's going to happen in the stock market tomorrow or what's going to happen with your portfolio tomorrow, that system is not working for you. So how do you sleep at night? Tell me about your investments right now. With all the volatility we just talked about, trade wars, we're in a cold war with China. There is a lot going on, man. How are you doing with your portfolio, and how do the other people that might be freaking out, what can they learn from you?
Well, I think we're all kind of programmed, if you are like when I started out and you're a financial advisor, and here you're talking about alts. That's very unique, Chris. Got to hand it to you. This is not a normal conversation, because traditionally financial advisors, financial planners are not the Chris's of the world. They're ones that are perpetuating kind of the lessons of our fathers and our grandparents, which is put everything in your 401k and IRA and I'll take care of you. Put things in the stock market, give it all to a financial planner. And then ultimately they're relying on keeping that money in there to pay themselves. And I think what happens is we just haven't gone through enough of a generation where people have moved away from that model, to where people are now being raised with other ideals, and that's outside of the stock market, which is, the 401ks were really built to get us out of the Great Depression. They were built to get excitement for the stock market, to get people back in the stock market. They were never meant to be the retirement option. And that's kind of what is the de facto belief right now. And the financial education of America is pretty low. So what happens is that you get in contact with somebody and they're like, yeah, I've got all these, I just don't want to do something I don't understand. Well, do you know even where your money is in the 401k? Do you even know what those companies are doing? Do you know how they're making decisions? No. I was like, well, then you've got your money in something you don't understand. And so that's why we emphasize education, but it's in that sense of kind of that sort of fear of maybe the unknown. Well, for whatever reason, I'm doing what I'm doing now, and anything else, whether that's justifiable or not, is new and scary. And I have to become an expert in this next thing. And I think the key there is it's that very fear of stepping out that Chris is pointing out. It's that very fear that stepping out, that's creating the lack of sleep at night, right? That fear of stepping away isn't causing you to lose sleep. It's the fear because you haven't stepped away, because you know that the stock market's cyclic, that real estate is cyclic, that whatever you're in, that there's a ride you could go on, and that could threaten your ability to retire or your basis when you do whatever it is. And so if you can overcome that, and you can realize that when you do finally step out and you do finally begin allocating like the wealthy into different investments that have different market drivers that don't rise and fall together, you'll find that you begin to sleep better. And like right now, you may do a pie chart of all your investments, and And then color code them. Which ones will ride the same market wave? You may find out that man, how does it feel now when you add one more pie piece that won't ride those same markets? How do you feel now? Maybe it's in precious metals. Maybe it's in oil and gas. Maybe it's in litigation finance. Almost every single time you walk somebody through that process, they start to feel better when they visualize their portfolio and how they'll sleep at night with a slice here and a slice there of reallocated funds in something that won't go for the same ride as everything else. And that's really the emotional journey that people have to go down, step into these alts. And that then drives that uncomfortable step to learn enough to partner with somebody else, because you're never going to be the expert in all these different alternatives. You said 5 to 10. Yeah, we were going for 7, 5 to 10, you said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, be an expert in all those. But you have to be able to drive yourself to learn enough to be able to partner with experts in each of these and in these things. So that's really that journey that people have to go down.
Patrick, I have 2 questions for you before we head out. And the first one's going to be, what was the best piece of advice you've ever received in your life? If you can go back to maybe 20-year-old you and someone came to you and told you, like, this is the best piece of advice, kid, listen up. You're probably not going to listen to yourself because you're 20 years old, but let's imagine that you're, a little bit more cognizant. What was that advice that you received that you wish you got earlier?
Well, so what started my journey was advice from the old founder of the machine design firm, Dave Carlberg, right? That he made all his money in high tech and invested and really helped reinforce that focus on a future family security. Later on, it was much later on that I went through the ride and I began with a master's degree, and then I started coming back from my second year abroad, and I started working and started investing and building a single family portfolio. And then I found myself once again just moonlighting real estate, which was working. But I had to stop eventually. It was working. Was buying assets and refining and renovating, and it was just working great. But I was just beating myself to death because it was just taking all my time. So I was doing these trade-offs, right? And so it was around that time that I was running along and I was listening to a podcast specifically about alternative investing. And the message was around don't make trade-offs between your family, friends, and hobbies because you're unwilling to partner with others to make your vision come true for your life. And it was do the work to learn how to partner. And during that same time, I told my wife, I was like, look, this is my last single family closing. We're going to go get married now. I can't do this and also, get married to you. It's just not going to work. And so that happened. We got married in Beijing. We got married in California. But it was after kind of getting that advice that I came back to it and I began to partner. And that's when I created my first private equity firm to take down larger assets with people in different markets and partner with different sponsors. And that led me to be able to do it not only in one type of apartment buildings, but commercial, industrial, warehouse, manufacturing, retail, and then do private credit, and then do oil and gas, and then do litigation, and then do minerals and precious metals. If I hadn't learned to partner along that way, if I felt like I had to continue to control and manage everything, I would have never been able to make it. I think that was potentially the pivotal moment that shifted, call it the next 10, 15 years of my life in a way that was able to allow me to build those 5 to 10, as you say, or, the 7 pillars.
Thank you, Patrick. And my final question is to you. Obviously, our podcast name is The FI Guys, the Financially Independent Guys. And over the years of doing this and talking with so many individuals, I've noticed that financial independence means something very different to every single person. So I have to ask you, Patrick, what does financial independence to you mean? More specifically, what is enough?
Well, it's the composition of financial independence that I constantly have an issue with, because you're talking, I host a mastery series every 2 weeks where every single time I'm bringing in some new expert in some new gizmo gadget, Forex trading, like all kinds of stuff. And I was just in a webinar 2 days ago, and it was oil and gas, and there was e-commerce purchase, rolling up CPA firms. But when you get really good and comfortable at something, you get way over indexed in that one thing.
Yep.
And the composition of that independence is really at the heart of not just financial independence, but financial security. And that is what I push for, because so many people get really comfortable with the one thing and they get way over indexed in that one thing. Then that fear pops up again. And they have to keep that journey of allocating. So that's what I would say first. I pick at independence because it's stability. It's stability in non-correlated investments that we really need to get to that next level. And then what is enough? Enough is when you get to that, call it third level, when it's not scarcity, it's not independence, it's security. It's when you're finally able to time freedom, location freedom, and the ability to give to the causes you care about most. Friends, family, your hobbies, and the causes you care about most. And that's when you're making decisions. When not just move for a short period of time to Hawaii during COVID, but, let's make that our home, right? You're making decisions about your life that enhance the quality of life for you, that you have the freedom to be able to do. And I think that's I can't give you a number. I don't know if you're looking for a number, but that's when I think you're on the right track.
Yeah, I would say enough is never a number. Or maybe it's very rarely ever a number. Patrick, you've been so kind with myself and our guests. Please, podcast is yours to go where to find you. If you provide me with links, I will leave them in the show notes below.
So Passive Investing Mastery, Chris, that's our website, passiveinvestingmastery.com. If you go passiveinvestingmastery.com/book, that's the secret link. It's nowhere on the website, but if you just go straight to there, you have to put the name of this podcast and the promo code, and I will send you a copy of this. It's a hard copy. Lessons from Thought Leaders. It was a bestseller, most recent one. And there's Phil Collins, lead guitarist, the Def Leppard is on here. I'm over here on the cover next to this Navy SEAL. There's NFL, NBA players, coaches. Really cool book. I had so much fun working with it. I tell my whole story in a chapter. Brian Tracy did the cover. I signed them and sent them out for free. And you can download the ebook if you want. Passiveinvestingmastery.com/book. And something I just put together, and by the way, on the website, right there, you can book a meeting with me. And wherever you're at in your journey, set up a call. I'd love to chat with you. It's part of what I love to do in this world, is invest back into those that are on this journey. So hopefully this book helps you along that way. And hopefully a call does as well. But new for us, we just put this out there, and it's Patrick's favorite alternative investing strategies. And I wrote like this. It's literally a one-pager that lists, here are the immediate investments you can make to begin building a non-correlated investment portfolio that will stand recessionary times. And this is kind of neat because people are constantly asking me, well, where are the best places to invest in if it's not just in real estate? And what are all these things? I mean, how can you get involved in metals and precious metals or technology metals, or how do you do affordable housing that are downside protected? How do you do litigation finance? Where can you go to do litigation finance? What about laundromats or CPA roll-ups? Like, what is oil and gas, and what are the ways you can invest in oil and gas? And what are the benefits? And what are the risks? So I get this stuff all the time. And so we actually wrote like a one-pager, but if you're interested in any of them, you can jump ahead. And it turns out to be like a 50-pager now, I think. But the one page gives you my favorite alternative investments that anybody today could immediately begin investing in. And that link is investwithpatrick.com. First time ever sharing that, but it's investwithpatrick.com. And that takes you directly to the PDF download for Patrick's favorite alternative investment strategies that anybody can invest in today to begin to build a sustainable, non-correlated portfolio.
Guys, Fi family, that is huge. Patrick, thank you so much for sharing that first time ever here on our podcast. Please, after we get off, I'm going to send you an email, try to get all those links, and they will be down in the show notes for you guys, so you don't even have to try to remember anything. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that our podcast was a little bit wide reaching that you normally do. That's what we always go for here on the Fi Guys podcast. And to our audience members, if you got value today, please be sure to send a like, subscribe, a comment, but most importantly, share the Fi Guys with one person in your life. Bring someone along the journey for financial independence. Just like Patrick talked about, the goal isn't just for you to be secure, but for you to help other people. So start on that journey today. help somebody along on the journey, and they can go with you because you can go so much farther together than you can alone. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Appreciate you having me, Chris.
This video podcast is sponsored by Monzon Wealth. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. We do not endorse specific products or services. Past performance does not guarantee future results. The opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests, not the podcast sponsor.
It is crucial to consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional who can provide advice tailored to your specific needs before making any financial decisions, investments, or taking any other actions. If you are seeking specified help, you can reach out to Chris at monzonwealth.com.